Hello, my name's Danny, and I am the founder of Parleya. Parleya is a new social media platform that incentivizes healthy conversation about traditionally polarizing or controversial topics. And today, I would love to give you all a quick demonstration about how Parleya works. So, on other social media platforms, you will essentially post a wide variety of different entities. On Instagram, you'll post pictures either of yourself or something else. On Facebook, you'll post life updates or something along those lines. So, on Parleya, the entity that you're actually posting is a conversation. So on this first page, we see basically a feed of a bunch of different conversations that other users have posted. And I think probably the easiest way for you all to get familiar with what a conversation is and how a conversation works is for me to simply create a new one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the bottom right here and click on this green button. And this button shows up on most of the main screens of Parleya. And so for the intended audience, and I'll just say for this conversation, it's going to be fairly basic. I would expect conversations on Parleya to be a bit more concrete than this. But let's just say I am a community member and I'm interested in figuring out ways that I can help my community. So I will have my intended audience be community members, and my conversation topic is how can I support my community? Obviously very basic, and I'll just say something simple here like I want to help, but I don't know how. How can I support my community? Okay, so very, very basic, as I said earlier. So I'll post this, and you'll see that the conversation shows up at the top of the feed now. Now I have Parleya open on two other phones, and these phones will be acting as other users. So now I'm going to go into this conversation, and the first thing you'll probably notice is that it actually in some ways has a similar feel to a Reddit thread, but you'll notice that the message at the bottom here kind of looks more like a text message. And largely a Parleya conversation has a similar feel as a text conversation, but it is set up for a user to connect with a wide variety of other people on the internet. And so what I'm going to do now is I am going to respond to this initial message from other users. And so what other users actually do is they will respond with what I call response candidates, and the reason I call them that will become clear in a second here. So on the first phone, I'm going to say something simple, just like volunteer, a very simple answer, and you'll see that this shows up right there. So that's one message, and then on the other phone, the other user might respond and say something very simple like find someone to help. Okay, so I will post that. Okay, now what you'll notice is that these two different messages don't really show up like two text messages. And the reason why I call them response candidates is because many people, as many users actually as they want, can post response candidates to your initial message. And then what happens at that point is that other users will either upvote or downvote messages. And the message that is upvoted the most is taken to be the official response of that conversation. So you'll see here, even though it's a fairly basic response, the message or the response candidate that says volunteer has more upvotes than find someone to help. And so when I click on show current official response, then that message shows up at the top. And that message is taken to be the quote unquote internet's official response. So now I, as the original poster of the conversation, might respond to this. And I'll say something very straightforward like, sounds like a great idea. Sounds great. What are some specific examples of that? Again, very simple. Then I'll click this. And now what happens is you'll see this kind of block of response candidates is fixed. And your other users are no longer able to upvote or downvote those response candidates. So after the original user posts to the kind of the response candidate block, the official response is fixed. And so that's to kind of keep it from being confusing to other users. And so now at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to act as an internet troll or someone who's being overly aggressive from one of my other phones. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially post a mean message. I'm going to say, you're dumb. So I'm going to post this message. And so now this will show up in the conversation. So the original user sees this message and they see it as kind of this aggressive message, a message that's unhelpful, it's insulting to them, and it's just generally unhelpful. And so you'll notice that there's a fairly prominent block button next to this initial message. So I will click on that, and I'm essentially giving users 3 different reasons to block a message. 1, the response is making an unnecessary personal or emotional attack. 2, the response is written by someone who clearly isn't the intended audience, and that's to try to minimize echo chamber effects. And then 3rd, the response is just off topic. So the first reason applies most closely to this particular message, so I'll click on that, submit, and then what happens now is the conversation is actually terminated. And this isn't actually a huge deal just because conversations are very lightweight and users can post a bunch of conversations. And also, coming from another perspective, these conversations are anonymous, so whereas on other sites you could click on a user's profile based on something they posted and see all the conversations they posted, you can't do that on this platform. And so a user can't basically see the original message poster or the original conversation poster. Anyway, so now I will talk about why this setup actually incentivizes healthy conversation. So you'll notice that there are 3 numbers associated with every single conversation and every single message. And so I'll click on this little I button here, and that'll pull up this dialog. So the first number with the X is the number of times that the user who posted the message or the conversation has had a message blocked or has been unfriended by another user. The second number is the number of times the user has blocked someone else's message or unfriended another user. And the third number is the number of successful conversations of which the user has been a part. And so what you'll immediately see is that if a person has a very high number, what that indicates is the person is maybe very aggressive, maybe very unhelpful. Just in general, there's something about the messages that this user is posting that really a lot of people do not find helpful. And for that reason, maybe this is a person who isn't someone that you would want to interact with. So in real life, if you went up to someone and you start a conversation and they start yelling at you, you wouldn't want to continue talking with them. And it's a very similar thing on this platform. If someone has a high first number, that indicates that this is a very aggressive person. If the second number is high, what that indicates is that they're blocking a bunch of other people's message, which in turn kind of implies that maybe they're overly sensitive, overly triggerable, and in general not willing to engage with a wide variety of other people's messages or opinions. And so if that number is proportionally significantly higher than the other 2 numbers, that's also kind of a red flag of maybe this is someone I do not want to interact with. So the kind of real life analogy is if you walk up to someone and you start maybe a difficult conversation and they immediately become incredibly offended and are unwilling to continue talking to you about that subject, then in general you probably wouldn't continue having those conversations with the person. So it's analogous in this situation. And then finally, the last number is the easiest to understand. If that number is high, what that essentially indicates is that person is very good at having good conversations. And so this is a user who will probably be good to engage with. And so the reason why I think that this system actually incentivizes healthy conversation is whereas with Twitter or Facebook or a lot of other major social media platforms, when you post a comment or you post a tweet or something along those lines, there isn't really anything in the back of your head that's telling you not to be mean. And unless you're aggressively hateful or aggressively racist or something along those lines, there's a high probability that your message won't be taken down. And so what happens there is this lack of consequences and this lack of incentive structure kind of ends up being a place where comment sections and kind of Twitter threads, Reddit threads can end up being a very toxic place. And so the difference here is that whenever a user posts, the assumption is that they want to be seen as someone that other people want to talk to. Because, I mean, even for internet trolls, the internet isn't interesting if nobody interacts with them or if there's literally no one to interact with. And so the assumption there is that they would want to be someone that other people would want to engage with, and therefore they might censor their responses more because they don't want to be seen as someone who is blocked frequently or something along those lines. And so that's really where these 3 numbers come into play. Now, the final bit of functionality that I want to tell you about is this last thing. So after a conversation finishes, and what I'm counting as a successful conversation is if the user and basically the quote-unquote internet, the response box, if there are 3 back and forths between the original message poster and the internet. At that point, I consider the conversation successful, and then the parties who were involved in that conversation will get the uptick of their last number. Anyway, so you'll notice that there's a friend button next to these messages. And so what this allows you to do is send a friend request to users who maybe made a very good point or something they said was particularly insightful. So let's just say, even though this is obviously a demo conversation and not very substantial, let's say I find that this first response to my original message I find particularly insightful or helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a friend request to that user, and I have that user up on my phone, so I'm going to quickly accept that friend request. And then what that allows me to do now is I can actually go into my chat conversations and I can actually have a more informal chat conversation with these users. So while the purpose of kind of the anonymity of Parleya conversations is really to promote discussions about particular topics and kind of keep the focus away from users and their political alignments or something along those lines, this part of Parleya allows you to connect more with different users and maybe hear more about a particular user's background or why they posted that or what caused them to form the opinion that they kind of presented. And so I might just post a very basic thing just to show you how it works. It's basically a text conversation. Hey there. Okay. And so yeah, you'll see that it's basically a text conversation. So yeah, so this is basically the basic functionality of Parleya, and just to show you all of the screens. So again, this is basically a feed of recent conversations that people have posted. This next kind of bubble at the bottom allows you to see the conversations you started, the conversations you joined personally, and this user in this case hasn't actually joined any conversations yet. And then this third tab here allows you to see your chat conversation. So essentially your text conversations. And just because I've given this demo before, you'll see a lot of Daniel G unfriended other Daniel. Anyway. And then this last section here allows you to see your very basic profile, and a profile is very simple. It just essentially consists of your first and last name, your 3 numbers, a 1 to 2 sentence bio, and then you also can see your friends. And so I'll go into Daniel G. Now on Parleya, just to keep some level of anonymity, I'm only allowing users to see the first initial of the last name of their friends and not their full name, just because in a platform where you're engaging with controversial topics, you don't really want people to feel like they're kind of exposing themselves to the internet in this way. So again, it's the profile and the friend profile is very, very basic. You just see the bio, you see the 3 numbers, and their very basic name. So yeah, that is the essential workings of Parleya, and I really hope you enjoy using this platform. Thank you very much.